which is an organization that was formed way back in the 1893 to protect Hawaiian independence. Co-sponsors of this event, along with Maile, Kui Aloha Aina, Maile Alii, and Kui petition continues. So, a couple months back when we had the latest vandalism incident at Iolani Palace, Lynette had this idea to do something about it. And if you know Lynette, she has a lot of ideas. She needs a lot of people to implement those ideas because she has so many. So she put together this task force to meet with Kippen, who is the director of the Friends of Iolani Palace, and Noelani Yuen, who is the director or manager of facilities and security within Iolani Palace. So we thought it would be a good idea to put together a panel and just talk about the history of Iolani Palace, where it's been and where it is going, and its significance in the Hawaiian community. So tonight we're going to have a panel presentation featuring Kippen, Noelani, Dr. Baron Ching. I don't have my script in front of me, I forget the organization. Dr. Baron Ching is a wealth of knowledge of Hawaiian history. And of course, Dr. Kiao Sai, political scientist, teaches political science at the University of Hawaii. So to start, we are going to do this. Are you going to speak first, Lynette, or should we just go right to the panelists? Okay, so each of the panelists will take 10 minutes to kind of talk about their kuleana. And then we'll get into some, we'll just go from there. So we're going to start off with Kippen.
Okay. Motion to you. Okay. So I'm going to give you a brief overview of the palace and the grounds. Why was this place chosen? Okay. So where we're at right now, in ancient times, this was known as Ka'ahai Mauli, a heiau. We're not sure exactly its purpose. And actually, when the cornerstone was laid for Iolani Palace back in 1879, they had talked about the legends surrounding this area, but they also didn't know for sure. So this was based on perhaps people who had lived here in the area for a long time, as well as legends that were handed down. But as far as any archaeological evidence, I don't believe any of that has been done to date below the palace. So the grounds here probably are a wealth of information that perhaps maybe one day, without having to dig below, that we can find out what's really in the ground here. So anyway, that's the first, that red dot there, and if you hit the button again. Okay, so this is in relation to two other important sites, Kanela'au, which is by Queens Hospital and Lusitana Street. And another temple site called Mana or Mauna, which is by Alapai and Kina'u Streets. The reason why those two are there is you'll notice the next big red dot, you can hit again. This is the big heiau, the most important pu'uaina, punch bowl, where human sacrifices were performed. So you can see this alignment from the mountain to the sea and why Ka'ahai Mauli, the position of the Iolani Palace, is important within this ancient context. And from that time period, Oahu chiefs used this site for their burials, in Pohokaina in front. And then when Kamehameha conquered the islands, his offspring, when they came here, they noticed that Honolulu, and particularly this place around the palace, seemed to attract a lot of the high chiefs, the most important people in town, started to build their homes around here. So the original Haliali'i, it was actually Hanaialoia. That was a name given to it by Mataio Kekuanao'a. He built it for his daughter, Virginia Kamamalu. King Kamehameha III came to Honolulu and saw this house. It was the biggest of the time. It was a single story, Greek revival structure made out of wood. And he decided he wanted it for his new palace and to move the capital from Lahaina to Honolulu in 1845. this is probably one of the most well-known examples of eminent domain. Okay, and then next one. Okay. So now under Kamehameha V, you can hit again. The King's Privy Council, so 1852 Constitution specifically names the King's Privy Council of State. These are the closest advisors to the King, and this was the makeup of this Privy Council in 1863. You notice there you have the first name Princess Ka'ahumanu. There were 5 Hawaiians with David Kalakaua as the secretary. And then you notice there were 3 Americans and 3 Scotsmen on this committee as well. So in this meeting of December 7th, the Privy Council received from Kamehameha V his desire to name Alii St. Alexander Palace, after his brother Kamehameha IV. The Privy Council didn't like the name, and so they said, no, we would like to have it named Iolani Palace, another name for Kamehameha IV. But they wisely said at the end of their letter back to the king, you're the king, you can do whatever you want. Kamehameha V actually took the advice of his Privy Council and named it Iolani Palace. That's how it got the name. Okay, so the palace that you see today took almost 10 years of planning. So 1871, again, Kamehameha V, he starts plans on a new palace. Okay? And he's looking at architects from Australia. The reason is he believed Australians understood the climate here and could design a palace that would take into account Hawaii's environment. 1872, Kamehameha V modifies the plans and actually ends up building a Iolani Hale across the street. Unfortunately, he passes away on December 11th, his birthday, that same year. Okay. 1873, King Lunalilo, first elected king of Hawaii, sworn into office on January 11th. Unfortunately, he only rules for 13 months. So 1874, Kalakaua is installed as the new king. And he is refurbishing the old palace, existing palace. But the government decides to demolish it because of termite damage. So Kalakaua moves into Kina'uhale on the grounds here. And at some point they do rename that Iolani Palace, but we haven't found the exact documents yet. Okay? 1878, the legislature appropriates $50,000 for the new palace. $50,000 is way too little. As they find out through the construction, the palace ends up costing a total of just under $350,000 when it is completed 3 years later. So 1879, cornerstone laid. This is on Queen Kupi'olani's birthday. 1882 is when the palace is finally completed. The first official function is for the Masonic Lodge, of which Kalakaua is a member, held on December 27th. All right, so from that point on to restoring the palace, okay, you can hit again. Hit again. So when we started this restoration project, I'm talking now about the Friends of Iolani Palace, we had no idea how Iolani Palace was built. We didn't know what materials were inside of it. We didn't know what was in the palace when the monarchy was here. And we had no idea what each of the rooms were used for. Other than, of course, the throne room, because the thrones were still there during when the territorial legislature met. So, Friends of Iolani Palace, we were founded June 8, 1966. We just had our 50th anniversary last year. Our founder is Lilio Kalani Kawananako Morris, right here. She is the third child of Abigail Campbell and Prince David Kawananako. And you can see her daughter is Abigail Kawananako, still alive today. And from Kapi'olani Campbell Field is the descendants of the other Kawananakos still living today. Okay. It is a picture of Lilio Kalani standing next to historic preservation architect Charles Peterson, who was brought in from Philadelphia to help with the restoration of Iolani Palace. In the 1960s, historic preservation was just beginning, and this would be the biggest project in Hawaii for restoration. Okay, 1969. So the research project, which was done by the Junior League of Hawaii, was completed. What they did was look at all of the historical information on file, especially the newspaper clippings, to find out what was used in the palace, what were the rooms used for, who came and visited. This is all again during the Kingdom time. So it was about 5,500 hours of research. They did a historical register and a documentary film. And then state offices move out of Iolani Palace into the new Capitol building behind us. Okay. So the palace renovation took almost 10 years, rededicated March 31st, 1978. And this was the first time that the Hawaiian Kingdom flag was raised over the palace since the overthrow. And when Liliuokalani's standard was taken down. So it's just a few before and after pictures. This is the gold room, and this was before we did the restoration of the furnishings. And this was in about 2012, when the room, which is what it pretty much looks like today. And this is the grand staircase. And that's what it looks like today with the new carpeting in place. This is historic. During Kalakaua reign, this design, he had this carpeting over the beautiful coal wood. It was hard to cover it. Noelani to this day hates the carpet. I won't say what you call it. But if we want to see how they lived back then, this is what they had. They had carpet. They covered beautiful wood floors. And that is my presentation.
Thank you, Kipin. There'll be a question and answer session, after everyone is done speaking. Right now, we're going to have Noelani speak.
Aloha. I don't have a presentation like Kipin, but I just wanted to give you a little bit of background of how my role ended up to what it is today. Over 10 years ago, I received a phone call from Kipin asking me if I'd like to join his team here. And I remember my response is, but it's dead. There's nobody there. It's empty. There's no one here. It needs to come to life. Going back and forth, I ended up coming on board as his facilities manager. Within the first year, is it a year? Yeah. We started seeing a lot of the different sovereign groups coming through, claiming that the palace is theirs. But for me, my kuleana was taking care of the building, not security. But eventually, on August 15th, 2009, right? That's when it was admissions day. I still remember admissions day. Security manager left for the day. We were closed down, and we were so excited that nothing happened. Then all of a sudden, Kipin gets a phone call in his office that there were men in red, security on the back, locking the gates. And we're like, oh no. And it was about 5 o'clock. And that's when the first phone call went out to law enforcement. Law enforcement never got here till 8:30. So we were here by ourselves, locked in this building, because it was the safest building. Didn't know what to do until finally at about 8:30 that evening, they cut the chains, went over the fence, however they got here, and they found the perpetrators in the central bedroom upstairs. Now, if they really wanted to sit on the throne, they would have done their research. They would know the throne room is downstairs. But they're very respectful. They had booties on, socks on, you know. But that day, I got smashed in this gate out here. And I was out for a while. So I hurt my back and my neck. I came back, and Kippen asked me, would you like to take over the security portion? And I'm like, wow, that's huge. But I was already watching everyone. So I said, okay, I'll try. And that's when we started changing a lot of the different security procedures here. We have had a lot of turnover here at the palace for not only security, but for all people. The palace, I'm gonna share with you, the palace brings to the palace who the palace needs, and it will get rid of who it doesn't need anymore. I've been here, so I guess, thank you God, that the palace really cares about us. We have come so far. We've been through a lot of groups, very, very frustrating that we were just the caretakers, but I don't think everyone realized that we were the caretakers. I think it was us against them until, I would say, the last 5 years. That's when everything started changing. Worked with the guards to make sure you give respect to whoever came on property. Talk to them. We're not going to yell at them. We need to talk story. Open up the dialogue to see what it is they're wanting versus what can we accommodate, you know, and help them with. There are rules. People got upset because there were rules, but we were we told them, the rules are for everyone. If I let you do this, I'm gonna have to make sure I let everybody else do the same thing. So we wanna make sure that we preserve this palace and the grounds for generations to come. So that's where we focused. Consistency and being fair to everyone is what I think where we got, everybody started looking at us differently. Like, okay, they really are the caretakers. So now they're collaborating with us. When they come on property, oh, by the way, we're not making trouble, we're just here, may we respectfully do this? We talk about it, is this in line with the vision of Iolani Palace where we want to be? Pretty much yes, and if it's yes, okay, we'll go ahead. We've made alliances with some heavy hitters. Bumpy is one of them. You know, he's actually helping us move forward. It's a pretty exciting time for us right now. We have a lot of work to do. Thank you.
Darren's next, right?
Yes.
So we're gonna switch out the PowerPoint to the other USB port. And while we're doing that, I'm just gonna, one of the things that Lynette and I were really impressed when we met with Kippen and Iolani is the way they approach the homeless population at Iolani Palace. And it's a compassionate form. It's not, you know, you're on a property, kick you out or anything like that. They're gonna try and take care, you know, and take care of them as well as they can. The homeless do leave at, was it 11? At 11 each night, and they come back. And one of the reasons that they do come back is because it's a safe haven for them. You know, they know they're not going to get harassed. Typical police and sheriff protocol, and we're not sure exactly who takes care of the palace. There's some discrepancy as to who actually has police powers on the grounds. But the typical protocol is, you guys probably seen it in action. It's to harass, it's to kick them out, it's to treat them with no compassion at all. So, you know, how would our queen would have treated, you know, their people, their lovely, and it's definitely with compassion. So, next up.
Now I'm off my watch.
Oh, Lynette, you watching, yeah? Your time.
No, if it feels like it's more than 10 minutes, I'll go.
All right.
All right. So
Thank
that
you,
tells
Barry.
me a couple of days ago, oh, why don't you go say something? We're going to talk about sacred places. Okay, that's cool, you know, I can go on for hours, you know. So from my perspective, okay, if you don't know, I'm a medical doctor. Okay, and we have hypotheses, and you test them, and if you can't prove it, then it doesn't exist, right? So, you know, concept of something being sacred is kind of like, okay, how do you prove that, you know? So my background is like, okay, I wrong guy to talk about sacred, but I think certain things we can pretty much agree are sacred if we whack that. Can we?
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, so, you know, Yolani Palace, I think we can all pretty much agree about that. It's sacred. I don't know how we can define it, but the other thing that for us, that we have agreement on is Kaneakapupu. For those of you who don't know, I'm vice chair of Ahahui Malama o Kaneakapupu. We've been partial stewardship of that place since 2002. And I think pretty much we can also say that's a sacred place. And we'll go into this a little bit about why it is. Again, without having to go into that esoteric concept of what constitutes sacredness. And part of our, and when I do this thing, like, man, I can go for like 2-3 hours doing the tour about what this place is about. But this is why I think we can call it sacred if we get the next one. Now this fellow, Kaui Keauli. Now this portrait comes from the 1840-41 Wilkes expedition, the United States American expedition to Hawaii. And about 26, 27 years old, handsome young fellow. But that's really what our focus is on, this guy. And I think he's kind of underrated in the world, and I don't think we know as much about him as we probably should. So if we could take the next slide. He was born about 1813, 1814. His mother was Ke'okulani. His father was Kamehameha Paea, uncle-niece relationship. He was born of the Pio class of chiefs. He was second tier was Ho'i because it wasn't a sibling relationship. But when he was born a living God. Okay, like the ground he walked on was pretty much sacred. He was a sacred guy. And in his time, he was instrumental. He was part of that thing that overthrew the kapu system. In 1819, his mother Keopuolani breaks the Aikapu with him and his sister Nahi Eneena. And Liho, Kamehameha II, is left with a quandary. What is he going to do? These guys broke the Aikapu. He just lost his father. According to the law, he's supposed to kill his mother and his 2 siblings. So he actually played a fairly major part in the overthrow of the kapu system, and that's the old base. So he was born in a cave, actually, a sacred cave, in Keauho, 1813, 1814, sometime around then. So next one. And he lives until 1853. And this is kind of interesting slide too, because Queen Kalama, and you know who Prince Albert Kunuiakea is, yeah? Okay, everybody says he had no descendants. Wrong. He actually had a kid, and that kid is Prince Albert Kunuiakea, the son of Jane Lahilahiang and Kaui Keauli. And under ordinary circumstances in the old days, this guy would have been Kamehameha IV. But because it was a Christian era, Prince Albert is a bastard. He's ineligible to sit on the throne. And one can kind of speculate about, what would have happened if he actually became Kamehameha IV. I think he lived until 1902. So if he ascended to the throne, the line of Kamehameha would have continued well into the 1900s. And one can only speculate what would have happened. So at the time that he was conceived, Kaui Keauli was married to Queen Kalama. And Jane Lahilahiang was married to somebody else. So again, it was a scandal of the times. You're besmirching the good name of our king, who obviously would never do this kind of thing. No, that's true. So eventually they adopt Prince Albert, and he's named the prince. But again, the son of the king, and a high chiefess, who ordinarily in the old days, that would have been a pretty high, ranking. And he would have been potentially the king, much like, Umi and Lilo. Yeah. So precedence for that. Next slide. Kauikeauli, again, we don't give him a lot of credit, but he actually forged modern Hawaii. He came into the world with, basically a feudal, state. And again, he was born a living God. His word was a law. His word was a religion. So what does he do? 1839, he raised the rates of chiefs and men. Okay, in 1839, he limits his power. He says all men have the right to pursue happiness and property. He says no longer can you just seize property. You have to condemn it, and then you have to compensate for it. And he says no longer can you punish people, for no reason. They gotta be found guilty of something, and the punishment has to be commensurate with whatever they did wrong. Next. Constitution of 1840. He forges a modern government of Hawaii. He creates the legislature, the Council of Chiefs, and the representatives, the chiefs. He forges the courts, and he becomes actually human. He just holds the office of the king. He's not divine anymore. Next. And of course, the troubles in 1843, La Hoihoi'ea, which we just celebrated now. And the international recognition, November 28th, La Ku'okua, all his doing. He guides the nation through troubled times. Next. He does the Maile, 1847. Next. And the Constitution of 1852. That's the interesting one. And we'll kind of go into that a little bit. Next. Declaration of Neutrality, 1853 Crimean War. And that's also an important thing that happened in Hawaii. You don't know how instrumental that actually was in keeping Hawaii independent. Part of the reason why we're independent today. Next. Okay, this is a really interesting document for a lot of reasons, okay, but it was very advanced for its day. And, a whole Bill of Rights, everything was put into this. But one of the more important things was that, in the Kingdom of Hawaii, slavery was never allowed. Never allowed. Okay. But, Article 12, there is no slavery in Hawaii. He codifies this. He puts this down in writing. He says, there is no slavery in Hawaii. A slave comes to Hawaii or its territories. You're free. You're free. This is like 12 years before the Civil War, and the Americans declared slavery over. So it led in all of this, yeah? Okay, another article. Article 26, which the Constitution of the United States does not have. No person shall ever sit upon the throne who has been convicted of any infamous crime or who is insane or an idiot. The Constitution of the United States does not have this. This is why the United States is in the position it is right now and why the Kingdom of Hawaii never had this problem. Okay, all part of the Constitution of 1852. All right, so next. All right, so why is Kaneakapuku important? I mean, is it sacred? Why? Well, I'll tell you why. To me, it's important. Okay. Because there is very little that's left of Kauikeauli today. There's really no other places really associated with him. Okay. This is the physical manifestation that this guy actually existed. Okay. This is not some historical figure on a piece of paper. Okay. It's not some story. This is a physical manifestation. He lived in this place. This was his hale. Okay. And even more than that, okay. A spiel for Kaneakapuku. Oh, I'm running out of time. All right. I don't know what's in the legislature or something they passed along. They said that to be eligible to sit on the throne of Hawaii, you had to go to Chief's Children's School because they didn't want dummies sitting on the throne, not like in the United States. Okay. But you had to be educated, and so you had to go to Chief's Children's School. Okay. If over here, summertime, vela, Woo, Bella. So what happens in summertime, they would go up to Kaneakapuku. And the pupils of the Chief Children's School would write, about their time they spent over there. And the point of all of that is, everybody was eligible to sit on that throne of Hawaii. Every monarch, everybody eligible for the throne. Every high chief, high chiefess who was eligible was in that building. In that building. We know that Kauikeauli was there because his bedroom is over there off to the left in the back. We know that Liho Liho built a house for Kauikeauli, grass, but nonetheless, suspect probably in the same area. And we also know that Paea Kamehameha in the Battle of Nu'uanu did not go to the final battle scene at Pali, but it said that he went to the heiau of Kaneakapuku, where he invokes Mamala Hoi. So that little patch of ground over there, perhaps even in those very walls, every single reigning monarch of Hawaii was in there or in close proximity. To me, that's why it's important. Okay? Whether it's sacred or not, I don't know. Okay? But I can tell you, for me, it's important because this is what remains of Kauikeauli. This is physical proof that he exists in the world. And to me, that's why it's important. And if that constitutes sacred, well, then that constitutes sacred. Okay, time up.
Thank you, Baron. For those that are interested, Baron coordinates monthly cleanups of Kaneakapuku.
Oh yeah, we're coming up Sunday too, if anybody's interested.
Oh, time here, 9 o'clock?
0900 to about 1 o'clock. And incidentally, for La Hoi Hoi Ea, August 4th, 1843, they held a big party to celebrate the restoration of the country. So 10,000 people went up to Kaneakapuku August 4th, 1843 to celebrate the restoration of the country. So it's going to be August 6th, but hey, close enough, right? Come and we will celebrate La Hoi Hoi Ea over there too. And we'll do a little work too.
Okay, so far, everything that I've heard, didn't learn in Kamehameha schools. It's going to continue with Dr. Keanu Science.
Well, for once, I don't have a PowerPoint. Because I figure only 10 minutes. That's a good time to talk. Well, my background is political science, but I shared earlier I focus on Hawaii's legal and political history. From Kamehameha I all the way till today. So I kind of know that feudal-like system that existed under Kamehameha through the constitutional evolution and bring it up to date. Now, I think I need to I want to try to put things in context. Yeah. And I think I'm going to start off with Walter Riddy. Okay, Walter Riddy is a good friend of mine. And Walter Riddy stated on a film, and he shared this with me personally, just talking, he didn't know what the palace was. And he graduated from Kamehameha, I believe, 1963. So that gives you a known point right there. So he didn't know what the palace was. So what was the palace in 1963? Actually, it was where the legislature met. And to him, he didn't see a palace, he saw a place that the legislature is at. He had no idea about Hawaii's history. He admitted that when he was at Kamehameha, he learned nothing about the Hawaiian Kingdom. He knew nothing about 1893, nothing whatsoever. It was later he began to realize that there was a different story. And that progresses to today. But I want to look at that point of 1963. I was born in 1964, okay? My dad, born in 1939, he didn't know anything either. And he went to St. Louis. Now we keep walking back, and we're slowly going to get to my great-grandparents. So my dad's parents were born in the 1880s. Now they knew what this place was, right? They knew this place, this palace, not as the palace as we understood it in the 1960s, but they understood the palace to be something very much comparable to the United States White House. Okay, that's where the executive branch is. And across the street, Alii Olanihale was called the government building, and that's where the legislature and the Supreme Court was at. So that's like where the Congress was, and then the Supreme Court in it. So basically what you had here was a seat of government. right? Now, back in the kingdom era, and we make mention to 1843, November 28, Hawaii was recognized as an independent state. It was actually one of only 44 countries in the world recognized as an independent state. Today, there are 193. Actually, if you go to 1945, when the United Nations was established, there were only 46 countries. 46. The rest were colonies, of empires. And through decolonization, they became independent states. Okay? So when you take a look at East Timor today, East Timor as a country used to be a Portuguese colony. If you look at Australia and New Zealand today, it used to be a British colony. But now, today we have 193. Imagine Hawaii was one of only 44 countries back in 1893 as an independent state. That's profound, especially being a non-European power. Because normally, it was European or Europeans that were the sovereign states. Non-European states in the 19th century, let's use the example of Japan, their independence, along with Thailand, Korea, Japan, along with Iran, Persia at that time, Ottoman Turks, they weren't recognized as fully independent. And what that means is when you're an independent state, like Hawaii was, equal to Great Britain, it means that only your laws apply over your territory. So anybody coming into your territory from the other countries, whether through their colonies or through the countries themselves, were subjected to your laws, or Hawaiian laws here, and they would be tried by these laws and judged by these laws. Okay. In Japan, Persia, Ottoman Turks, they weren't. In fact, if you were an American citizen and you got into trouble in Japan, you could only be prosecuted under American law in Japan, not Japanese law. And it was the American consulate that would exercise consular jurisdiction for the prosecution, not the Japanese. Now in 1881, King Kalakaua was in Japan during his tour, and the Meiji Emperor had a one-on-one meeting with him and the foreign minister. And he asked King Kalakaua, would you be the first power to recognize Japan's full independence? He's saying the first power of the other 43 countries, because Hawaii was the 44th. Would you be the first to recognize Japan's full independence and set that stage for the others to follow? He didn't follow through because he came home to a hornet's nest. He walked into the Bayonet Constitution at the beginning of the insurgency. But it was his sister, Queen Lili'uokalani, in January. A dispatch was sent to Ambassador Irwin in Tokyo, which arrived after January 17th, and on January 18th, the Japanese foreign minister was notified that Hawaii, the Hawaiian Kingdom, will recognize Japan's full independence and that rescind consular jurisdiction. So any Hawaiian subject in Japan would be prosecuted by Japanese law, because up to that point, if a Hawaiian subject, like an American citizen or a British subject, if a Hawaiian subject was in Japan, got into trouble, he can only be prosecuted under Hawaiian Kingdom law by the Hawaiian consulate, right? So when we start to look at these things in this context, we start to look at Hawaii as a co-equal with the United States, right? Now, what happened? How did that change? Where did that memory go? Why is it that Walter had no idea of anything? Why is it that my dad had no idea? I had no idea. I didn't know what I know now back at Kamehameha. Well, this area right here is where everything went down. Now, if Hawaii, because Hawaii was a sovereign state, along with the rest of the countries, it was governed by international law. And there are two state of affairs that existed at that time as it exists now. There's no middle ground. You're either in a state of peace or you're in a state of war. And under international law, there are trigger words that heads of state will say that would transform a situation from a state of peace to a state of war. And what happened here in Hawaii? When the Queen is in the executive office, the building, U.S. Marines land. They invaded Hawaii on January 16, 1893, without the consent of the Hawaiian government. At that time, the governor of Oahu was actually Princess Kaiulani's father, Archibald Clayborn. And Samuel Parker was the Minister of Foreign Affairs, and they're protesting. Why did you land? No response by the ambassador. And then the following day, the Queen does a conditional surrender, asking the President to investigate the actions taken by their minister and to reinstate her into that position as executive monarch. Now, history is now showing, it's kind of interesting. Ron Williams, William O. Smith, a collection of material that was submitted to the Hawaiian Mission House. They actually have the original letter of surrender by the Queen, the conditional surrender, the protest, signed by her. Did you know that these individuals did not give that to the United States government? The provisional government actually hid it in a trust. And now it's coming out. So it's showing that President Harrison didn't know that the Queen did a conditional surrender. It wasn't until March of 1893, when you have a new president, President Cleveland, is when Paul Newman, the former Attorney General, on behalf of the Queen, travels to Washington and hand delivers that protest. That's when the United States government received it. And then that's what initiated the investigation. James Blunt, so-and-so, and on December 18th, President Cleveland said that the military demonstration on the soil of Honolulu, in and of itself, was an act of war. Now, an act of war stated by a head of state within that 44 members of the family of nation, that means state of war. And the Queen's conditional surrender was merely ceasing of hostilities, not transferring it to a state of peace. That's what prompted President Cleveland to negotiate with the Queen at the American legation up towards Nu'uanu, which is the embassy, for settlement, meaning a peace treaty. And that was completed December 18th, but President Cleveland couldn't carry it out to reinstate the Queen in her position and her cabinet. And then that's when the narrative began to change. And then when the United States reoccupied Hawaii physically during the Spanish-American War in 1898, that's when policies were implemented to begin denationalization. Specifically 1906, Program for Patriotic Exercises, to be applied in the public schools. Everything was in English in all the public schools. Everything taught was American history, nothing about Hawaii, and that's my grandparents' generation. That is when that's all they knew. And if you spoke the Hawaiian language, which was the national language, not the native language, the national language of a country, you were beaten. Those are the stories we hear. By the time it got to my parents' generation at St. Louis, it's already institutionalized. Now we can understand Walter's statement in 1963. I didn't know anything. And then by the time it got to me, at Kamehameha, graduated in 1982, I was clueless. I went off to a military college, get a commission. And only now we're starting to awaken to what this place actually represents. It's like the White House. So when I see this place as a sacred site, I see it as a sacred site from a political standpoint. This is like the White House of Washington, D.C. And we're all starting to wake up to that. And then we're starting to see things in a very different way. And I think this is the time of education. This is the time of exposure. And what I like to call it is, this is a time of recovering memory, national consciousness. Mahalo. I'm so sorry, real quick. Okay, I got 1 minute, right? Go ahead. I was watching my time. This is awakening right here. This is profound. I want you folks to read this if you haven't. The Hawaii State Teachers Association had a delegation that went up to the National Education Association conference in Boston, Massachusetts. And they were able to introduce a proposal that the NEA will do, and they all voted on it. And I'd like to read it. It says, the NEA will publish an article that documents the illegal overthrow of the Hawaiian monarchy in 1893, the prolonged illegal occupation, could be illegal in there, but the prolonged illegal occupation of the United States in the Hawaiian Kingdom, and the harmful effects that this occupation has had on the Hawaiian people and resources of the land. Now, coming from Hawaii State Teachers Association Facebook, they stated that Chris Santomaro, a teacher at Kaneohe Elementary, introduced the proposal, and Uluhani Waialeale, a teacher at Kualapu'u Charter School on Molokai, gave an impassioned and articulate argument in favor of the proposal, and it swayed a majority of teachers from across the United States to support it. That's heavy. That means they're waking up as well in America. They're not saying investigate whether or not Hawaii's occupied. They're writing an article documenting it because they're relying on a lot of the research that has and continues to take place at the university level. And that is profound. And that research is not just limited to natives. It's open to everyone who are in research institutions. And I would like to recognize here real quickly Emanuela from Italy, who has taken up this issue of Hawaii's occupation, not from a Hawaiian lens, but from an Italian lens, because Emanuela is from Italy. And she's doing her doctoral research from an Italian view, looking in and looking at the records in Italy, not just here. And she's coming up with that same information that we're coming up with at this university and other universities throughout the United States. And with that, mahalo.
Lynette, is it your turn?
Yeah. So two things we wanted to do was, and I volunteered myself and Mona to actually do a response from the audience. You want to go first? I volunteered for one. I volunteered. What is a response from the audience look like? Just responding to what was shared earlier, and Mona also, because Mona did research on some of the documents that are held here to look at what happened in the last, I don't know, World War II, Second World War II. What kind of damage, if any, has occurred on the palace grounds. So, and she wrote her document, and we sent that around like yesterday, so some of you may not have had a chance to read it. Fascinating stuff. I wanted to comment on that. In that document, people have broken the doors, broken the windows, and then Hawaiians have gathered on the palace ground, with or without a permit. We'll see without. And I'm going to say this because the preponderance of activities with or without a permit occurred in around the year in 2000s, from 2000 and on, although there were some in the 1990s. And I'm going to say, because I think I'm correct, I was at every one. In the year 2000s. And so you're going to ask me, like, why am I at every one? Because I was more coordinated than I am now. But I still am. Things have shifted. The title of this presentation is called A King's Noble Vision, which is a kickoff on the title of the video that you get to watch if you do the palace tour. A King's Noble Vision, Iolani Palace in an Age of Historical Recovery. So, while I'm happy that the palace is taking a different perspective on how they treat people who are coming and going. I think the reality is that there haven't been a whole lot of in-your-face ku'e on these grounds for a different reason. And that has to do with historical recovery. The beginning, way back when, marches, all kinds of things that took place here, storming the palace steps, like anybody garrisoning, stuff like that. I don't think they made a difference, but to us, it was a statement because we did not see the difference between Iolani Palace and the state of Hawaii. Those two entities were stuck together. So whenever we looked at who the enemy was, it wasn't necessarily the palace, it was a state. Who are these guys? Big state, blah, blah. How safe is it to actually go and protest over there? Not to. You could get arrested, you would get arrested.
Right.
Well, we could do it here. Because here, people understood that we had a case that we are Hawaiians, that this place is ours, not just the palace, the whole place, but this was a place that was safe for us to convene and to actually have something to say about it. So yeah, I think we've experienced, I don't know how many cops taking pictures of us while we're taking pictures of them, and just things going back and forth for like the last 10 or 15 years. And then nothing. I don't know when the last thing was, like protest or whatever on the palace grounds, but it seems to me that there's no need to do it. And when you recover your history, you realize that any harm done to this place is harm done to ourselves. This is our place. And in the claiming of our history, we claim this part because it's stuck in our history. So it doesn't belong, that anger that we felt back then, I don't think we feel it so much towards the palace anymore. It was misplaced, but easy target, right? We can talk shit about the state of Hawaii, but we really can't do anything there without risking something to ourselves. So we did it here and it was safe here, but then we stopped doing it because we don't need to do it. So from my point of view, I'm going to speak for myself and for all the guys the kind of people I hang out with who have been doing that kind of thing. And I know you know it all very well because you guys are on the other side of where we work. It's not necessary because you might say that we have come into our own. I'm going to thank people like Yano for bringing that history forward because the more we learn, the less angry we are.
Yeah.
But that anger came from knowing zero.
Yeah.
And the more we know, the more empowered we have become because we know. Not only is that other stuff, that other stuff that's being talked about by all the other Hawaiians that are out there that have been so totally Americanized that they have accepted someone else's history, the one that Walter Ritty got and I got, as the thing that defines them. And here we are, the rest of us are saying, that is not true. That's crap. And so here we are in the middle of this kind of resurgence of history, and the more we get, we have become history junkies, I think. The more we get, the more empowered we are. And we don't have to fight. We don't have to fight. Because we win. There is no way to undo that history that we are now learning about. We already won. So then we can be really kind. You know what I mean? So now I can go to Kipin and Noilani and I'm going to say, so is it okay if we come over here and do this and the other? And the reason for doing that is, you're not my enemy. This place is ours. We own it. And so knowing that is really empowering and I feel like, okay. I just wanted to say that. And what I wanted to ask Manu to do, since she did that research, you guys should see it, maybe you can make it available. It's amazing. But because you're an anthropologist, I wanted you to say, as someone not from Hawaii, what you saw in doing the research.
So, first of all, allow me to thank
Stand.
Well, allow me to thank Stephen and Noelani for giving me access to the paper and the documents that I read carefully and went through everything. What I've learned a lot. I learned the palace point of view, I'll say. I'm an observer. I see myself as an ally of the Hawaiian kingdom, or the kingdom of Alii. So I see from an outsider point of view. And to me, it was the palace talking. Even if there were mainly articles written by men, but it was the point I tried to see what the point of view of the palace and the ground was. And the point of view was that the palace doesn't belong to anyone. It doesn't belong to the state, doesn't belong to the different sovereignty group that claim it. The palace belonged to itself and to the people who love the palace. And I think that the friend of Yolani Palace did a very good job in taking care of the palace. They were the konoiki of the palace, taking care of it for the people of Hawaii. And I think at that one point, the groups, different groups, and I cannot talk for everyone, but the one that I read, realized that's the point when the hangar stopped and you started working together. There was a different energy also, not energy, I wouldn't say energy because it's naive, but it was more solid. The document that I was reading were more solid at the point that people were working together. And you could see it, because no harm was done to the palace anymore, except by random people who had serious problems. That's what that's my understanding at least. So I think, from my perspective, I need to thank them for taking care of the palace and thank the people for reaching out to their history, because the palace holds the history. All the answer that you want to know, the palace has it for you. It's all kept, not inside the palace, but in the palace ground. So if you learn the history of the palace, if you learn the history of the ground, and I really appreciate keeping PowerPoint at the beginning, because you show us the land. We see the palace and it's beautiful and it's important, but the land where it's built was chosen for a reason, and I think that's also important. But that's it. And then I have a lot to say, but my English is not that good. I'm learning day by day. But if you have any question, I'll be here and I'll answer to anyone.
So I know Lynette said, okay, she's going to say something else right now. Go ahead, Lynette.
7:30.
Volunteers, we take down the flag.
We need a couple volunteers to keep the flag. And then we're going into the second round. We can do it right now.
No, we're going to yeah.
Yes, I'll offer to you.
And then it was answered a lot of questions, but I came across a question I couldn't quite answer. And so we talked a lot about how what happened was illegal under the laws of occupation. And the question I came across was, if the laws of occupation were established in 1907, how do they affect what happened in 1890?
Okay, good question. Okay, so when you talk about international law amongst the 44 countries that existed at that time, in 1893, The primary source of international law is called customary international law. There is no legislative body at the international level. So customary international law refers to all 44 countries operating on an understanding that this is how it's supposed to be. Okay, and that becomes what is called customary international law. Now, because international law recognizes two states of affairs, a state of peace and a state of war, there are laws, international laws that apply to a state of peace, and there are also international laws that apply to a state of war. And that term is it's a Latin word, it's called jus in bello. Okay. Now, in 1899, Tsar Nicholas, the Tsar from Russia, got together the countries to come together in The Hague in order to codify customary international law, not create international law. So codification is taking what is understood by all 44 countries and putting it into a treaty. And that came to be known as the 1899 Hague Conventions. Okay? And that first Hague Convention of 1899 is what created the Permanent Court of Arbitration as a means to resolve disputes so you don't go to war. But if you can't resolve the dispute, then the other Hague Conventions that follow is what regulates the war, right? But it's codification of what was already international law. And then that was then superseded in 1907. So what occurred in 1893 was the same international law that applied as it would in 1907 or 1899. And that's not a matter of argument or disagreement. International scholars have all accepted the fact, and even when they went into the conference in 1899, it said that we are not creating new law, we are codifying existing customary international law. And that's important too, so they even were saying that. Because they also said it's called the Martin's Clause, okay? So Martin was a diplomat. If they weren't able to codify a particular customary international law, the Martin's Clause says it is still law because it's customary, right? So it was a process to codify. Because the class you took was Hawaiian Studies 107 with me, yeah?
No, it was.
The 255?
Yeah.
Okay, I gotta make sure I make that point even stronger in the next class. That's a good point though.
So for Kevin and Noelani, so how does the Friends of Iolani Palace feel about your current leadership?
Currently, are you referring to the board of directors?
Yeah, whoever your boss is.
Okay, so that's the board president.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
How do we feel? Actually, we work very well together with the board. This was not always the case. But I would say in the last, 3 to 4 years, we have been working in step. We're in tune with each other, and so it is great alignment. And so there's no conflict. And therefore, because there's no conflict between us and the board, we don't have conflict with the community. I think before, what we were trying to do was we were trying to please our bosses, and they were afraid of the community. And that's why a lot of the events, and Lynette had mentioned them in the past, the board actually in meetings would say, we don't want them here.
Well, just to clarify a little too, I used to sit on the board. And yeah, I think that everybody was afraid. That's why I was sitting on the board. I was supposed to be kind of like the liaison between the board and us guys out there.
Can I add to Mana's question? What Ken was talking about the age of consciousness that's experiencing, we have been experiencing, that he described. How does the board feel about that? Have they recognized that? Has that affected the relationship? Is it relevant?
The age of consciousness hasn't gone that far. I did not mention Calvin by name, but I did mention that we would begin in our education here at the Palace to look at this, it's not new information, but to look at the historical information. And one of the comments back from the board was, make sure who it's from. right? They want to know who. So again, there's this maybe not trusting. So, but we're going to work on them, and because this is, you know, what Keanu has shared with me, this information, this does need to get out, and so we're going to put this together into an educational program, and our goal is to push it into the schools. Start earlier, much earlier.
Okay, so my question is, do you have any leanings on teaching not just about the physical building, the palace, I know that Friends of Iolani Palace, but also about the places that we are on, Pohukaina, the burial places that were here. Kalani Moku had his house here. His brother was right next door. Ponuakaha, where Keopulani. I mean, just within this 3-block area, there are so many significant events that tell not just about the Alii, but about the people, the birth of Princess Ruth here, Luna Lilo. You know, so it's the whole gamut of life, yeah. So is there any kind of movement for the Iolani Palace to start telling that part of the story also?
I'm glad you brought that up, because that's exactly what we want to do, is to bring this whole area to life and to talk about all of the people who lived here before any of these buildings were built, and before Iolani Palace was built. And also to bring in the other part of the story, and Kim and I have been talking about this a lot. What was the reason that brought them here, other than, you know, I showed you the Heiau sites, but also Kauai Hau Church had a lot to do with why they were in proximity, and the mission houses. So that story as well, what the missionaries were doing here at the time. So it's a very complicated story, and it's not black and white.
Was Hawaii's neutrality universally recognized, and when or where can we do research regarding that topic?
I'm assuming that's to me.
I would say Wikipedia.
Well, there's a lot of things on Wikipedia that are like. Okay, so we speak about Hawaiian neutrality. Again, let me bring that back. Remember, there's 2 states of affairs, a state of peace and a state of war. The status of neutrality would not apply during a state of peace. Okay? The status of neutrality only kicks in and being active during a state of war, when other countries are fighting. And a neutral territory is where no one can come in, right? They're not supposed to come in. And if they do come in, especially Hawaii being in the middle of the Pacific, so if anybody will be coming in the 19th century, it'll be by ships, right? It'll be by naval vessels. What they would have to do is disarm, enter the port, refurbish, leave past the 3-mile limit, rearm, and then they go off fighting. So that's what neutrality is. Now, Emmerich de Vattel, a jurist, okay, he stated, which has been cited a lot on codifying neutrality, okay, he said that for small countries to ensure and protect their independence, they don't wait until war breaks out and they declare neutrality like Kamehameha III did during the Crimean War, right, between the Ottoman Turks and then Great Britain and France, because you might have naval battles here. You actually do it before, right? You get that neutrality recognized in treaties. And Hawaii was able to get its neutrality recognized in the German, the Swedish-Norwegian Treaty, and the Spanish Treaty. In fact, the Swedish-Norwegian Treaty even predates the Crimean conflict. Okay? Now, once it's recognized in these treaties, then international law has what is called the most favored nation clause. Okay? And that's when it applies to everyone else. And the most favored nation clause is what is given to one, meaning the protection of neutrality and the citizens in the country must be given to all other countries. Okay? So you don't actually have to have a treaty of neutrality with every member of the Family of Nations. You just got to have it in 1 or 2 or 3 treaties itself. Now, an example of that application of the most favored nation clause is the 1871 Hawaiian-Japanese Treaty. The 1871 Hawaiian-Japanese Treaty has no provision there for Hawaiian subjects to be prosecuted under Hawaiian Kingdom law by the Hawaiian Consulate. That came from the unequal treaties that Japan had with Great Britain, France, Russia, United States, and others. Okay? Because they were doing it, Hawaiian subjects came under that provision as well. So you don't see an unequal treaty physically between Hawaii and the United States, but you do see the effect of that most favored nation clause for any Hawaiian subject who gets into trouble in Japan. He can only be prosecuted under Hawaiian Kingdom law, which led the Meiji Emperor to ask King Kalakaua, would you be the first of the powers to recognize Japan's full independence? So neutrality and the prosecution under consular jurisdiction are quite similar. These are provisions that would be universally applied. One of the principles of the founding of nations, because you have countries that are co-equal, then what is given to one must be given to all. That's the rule of international relations. And I'll give you a point where a bone of contention came up based upon the most favored nation clause was the 1884 Supplementary Convention to the 1875 Hawaiian American Reciprocity Treaty, which was a commercial treaty. In that 1884 supplement, okay, which was basically forced on the Hawaiian government, which ultimately was ratified in 1887, right, bayonet, and then came the approval of this supplementary convention, was the exclusive use of Pearl Harbor for recoaling and refueling only for the United States ships. Actually, the British were coming down hard on Hawaiian government officials. That is a violation of international law because it violates the most favored nation clause. In fact, there was in Curtis E. Alkia, when he served as envoy, I believe it was in Russia, one of the diplomats brought that point up to Curtis E. Alkia. This is illegal. So you can kind of see how it plays out, this most favored nation clause, but you still have diplomacy, negotiations, but there are these fundamental rules that as we wake up to this information of the facts, we also have to wake up to how the law operated at that particular time at many different levels. We cannot assume what we do here at a national level applies at the international level. It's a different system. Yeah. And I can tell you, the Hawaiian Kingdom and its foreign diplomats were very, very well versed on these issues, very much so.
Ken, I have another question for you, if you don't mind. In 1893, the Japanese was granted full recognition by Queen Liliuokalani, correct? So I'm wondering, since they became full-pledged as a nation, I'm thinking that they did not support the Queen in her support her against America's intervention in this overthrow. So, would you care to elaborate on that?
Okay, so a point of clarification. So when the Hawaiian Kingdom, through Ambassador Irwin in Tokyo, formally notified the Japanese government that the Hawaiian Kingdom recognized Japan's full independence, they did not speak on behalf of the other 43 countries. That's just one country, okay? That didn't mean that Japan was internationally recognized as an independent state. They did not become an internationally recognized independent state until just prior to 1899. After Hawaiian recognition in 1893, British recognition came in 1894, and it was a process, right? And then by the time it got to the 1899 Hague Convention, actually the Russians invited Japan to participate in codification of the laws of war, which was an explicit acknowledgement that Japan has reached that status. Now the Kingdom of Siam, which is Thailand, China, well actually China was a part of that as well. But Siam came after 1900. So it's not, international law does not happen overnight where one country recognizes another country. It has to be universally understood and accepted that all the countries without question recognizes that independence. It won't happen in a day. Now, Now let's take a look at Hawaii's independence. Ours is different though, okay, from Japan being independent. You folks notice the Union Jack is on the flag, right? Prior to 1843, we were British. British by nationality, not ethnicity. Ethnicity is English and Scottish and Welsh. British, okay? Kamehameha I joined the British Empire. He was a protectorate. Hawaii was a protectorate, similar to Tonga, okay? The way you can tell if Hawaii was a colony or if an entity is a British colony is when you have a governor general assigned there. And that governor general represents the king or the monarch of Great Britain. New Zealand had a governor general, still has one. Australia, all the colonies that became independent states but are still part of the Commonwealth have governor generals, but in a limited capacity. You had no governor general in Hawaii. You had Kamehameha and the chiefs that was still running the country. That's a protectorate. They joined the British Empire. The same with Tonga. Tonga was not colonized. There was no governor general there like in New Zealand. It was part of the British Empire. So when Hawaii achieved its independence, it did not require the other countries to recognize Hawaiian independence. See, Japan was not part of another country separating in international law. Hawaii was actually separating from Great Britain, so that November 28, 1843, that Anglo-French proclamation, not so much with the French, it was actually the British. Once the British recognized Hawaiian independence, it's like the United States being recognized by King George becoming an independent state. That was not dependent upon the rest of the world recognizing them. The rest of the world would only enter into diplomatic relations with them, not recognize their independence. So that's what Hawaii was. We became independent November 28th. That's why we celebrate that day, La Kuokoa. It didn't take time to get our independence like Japan had to do, which took many years, as well as the other non-European powers. So those kind of things are very important in understanding the historical facts, but also the theoretical framework, whether law or politics, that apply to those facts. That's what's important. So the question about how does it apply to...
Yes.
I can't speculate on Japan and dealing with the intervention, but there is some record that says